So good afternoon to all here in Geneva, and good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on where this finds you online. I'm happy to welcome you all to this lunchtime event on BWC national implementation at the fourth meeting of the working group on the strengthening of the BWC. So the various events that we have organized as UNIDIR this week are intended to support ongoing activities of the BWC working group and hopefully stimulate thinking and discussion around different key topics. So earlier this week, we held an event on a study of voluntary transparency initiatives and another one on a new BWC education program. And as we celebrate the first anniversary of our BWC National Implementation Database, this event today is focusing on taking stock of national implementation, and we are co-organize it, with our colleagues from VERTIC. So at the outset, I should note that this event is being recorded, and we'll make the recording available online in the coming days. And today we have brought an excellent panel of scholars and diplomats to provide an overview of trends in national implementation and explore challenges and opportunities to advance the implementation of the BWC. The event will begin with a moderated discussion among experts before a Q&A session with the audience. So we welcome input from all of you, including our participants online. And if you're not in the room, you may at any point during the event use the Q&A function, which can be found at the bottom of your screens. Your questions and comments will be treated anonymous, but if you want to be credited, please put your name and affiliation in the text box. But before we start, let me introduce you to our panelists. So first on my left is Dr. Sonia Drobiz, senior researcher at UNIDIR. She holds a PhD in public international law from Paris 1 Panthéon-Sorbonne University and has more than 10 years of experience in supporting legislative implementation of the BWC and other international legislative implementation agreements in the field of disarmament and arms control. We also have the honor to be joined by Ms. Atikarnbel Dilogwatana, a counselor at the Permanent Mission of Thailand. Ms. Dilogwatana holds an LLM from Queen Mary University in London and has represented her country in various capacities since 2010. Of particular importance for this event is that Ms. Dilogwatana is a friend of the chair on national implementation. So really thanks for joining us today. And we are also joined by Mr. Sylvain Faniel, who is project coordinator and legal officer at the BWC ISU, where he supports the implementation of the convention in African countries. Mr. Faniel holds a PhD from the University of Antwerp and has worked for various entities in the field of arms control, including the IAEA. So thanks to all again for joining us. And to start, I will now give the floor to Mr. James Reville, who is the head of our WMD program at UNIDIR, and he'll provide some welcome remarks. So Jamie, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Lewis, and good afternoon, colleagues. It's good to see you all. I wanted to provide a bit of an update on the database. So in August of last year, at the second meeting of the working group, UNIDIR and VERTIC launched the BWC National Implementation Database. This in itself was the result of quite a lot of work and collaboration with UNIC, with VERTIC and with UNIDIR in figuring out research methods, processes and admin. With your indulgence, I just wanted to provide you a short update and sort of take advantage of this event to be able to provide you a bit of an update around the database. So since starting the project, we now have 125 BWC states party country profiles on the database. Each of these profiles covers a wide range of possible national implementation measures, covering different prohibitions, biosafety activities, oversight, lists, and assistance and cooperation offers that have all been diligently researched by our team here. We also have more than 2,200 resources, so this is laws, regulations and materials. And I'm delighted to see that we're actually picking up interest. So we normally get about 1,000 users a month, and we've had interest in the website from 180 countries around the world. And I think particularly gratifying from my perspective is that the database is actually being used by officials, by scholars, and by those working in international organizations in their work, which is really encouraging. We're planning to further take stock of national implementation and actually use the database ourselves ahead of the 50th anniversary year by going through and trying to go through and look at what has actually been done, taking stock of national implementation in the BWC at 50. So do keep following for that. By that point, we will have completed all the country profiles and we'll have translations of both the profiles and materials in all UN languages. I think what has perhaps been most gratifying, though, in the development of these profiles and the work that we've done is that we've been able to do it in many cases with collaboration from states parties, from delegates, who have kindly taken the time to reply, to review drafts that have been assembled by the team, to discuss these and engage in the development and the refinement of country profiles in a way that I think really helps make the database and the material contained within it accurate, balanced, and a fair representation. It's fair to say that if you haven't heard from us yet, you probably will do. We've got about 60 more countries to go, so we will reach out to you and we'd really appreciate it if you respond. We make no claims to the database to be perfect, but it is something that I'm extremely proud that the team have been able to assemble. And I did just want to take the opportunity as well to thank our funders in the US Department of State for supporting this project. I want to thank our colleagues in UNICC, our partners at VERTIC, represented here by Alex at the front, and then the BWC database team here at UNIDIR, which includes our chair here, Louison, also Clarice, Yaroslav, Sonia, and Maria, who all collectively have made this work, and I'm very grateful. I'm also, just to reiterate, very grateful for those of you in the room that actually took time to engage with us. We do want to make this a living database and one that is sustained. So if you do have new laws, new regulations, new measures, please do let us know, along with our ISU colleagues as well. But if you've done something, we'd like to keep it updated and accurate, so please do tell us. With that, Madam Chair, I'll hand back to you, but just to wish you all a good afternoon. And for those of you travelling back, I wish you safe travels. Thank you, Louison.
So thanks, Jamie, for these welcome remarks and for providing also updates on our database project on its first anniversary. And now I'll give the floor to Dr. Sonia Drobiz, who will provide an overview of BWC national implementation. So Sonia, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Louison, and thank you all for coming. It's a great pleasure to be part of this panel. So during the next 10 minutes or so, I will provide some insights on the meaning, the scope, and the status of national implementation of the BWC, as well as some potential suggestions to strengthen national implementation. Those insights are based on my experience working on BWC national implementation, as Louison was kindly explaining in the introduction, but also my work as part of the team on the BWC national implementation database, which, as Jamie said, includes a number of useful data now so that we can reflect on the status of BWC national implementation. But first, I wanted to clarify what I mean by national implementation in the context of this discussion. So by national implementation, I refer to the adoption of measures, legal measures, including legislation, regulations, but also administrative measures to give effect to the convention at the national level. I will not so much develop on the subsequent application and enforcement of legislation, which, however, also deserves attention. So the central provision of the Convention regarding national implementation, as we've heard over the past few days in the context of some discussions on national implementation, is Article 4, which requires each state party, in accordance with its constitutional processes, to take any necessary measures to prohibit and prevent certain activities with agents, toxins, weapons, equipment, and means of delivery, as specified in Article 1 of the Convention, within the state's territory, under its jurisdiction, or under its control anywhere. Article 4 therefore includes an explicit requirement to implement the Convention at the domestic level, with regards to the prohibition and prevention of the development, production, stockpiling, acquisition, or retention of biological weapons. The scope of the requirement, however, is not always clear, and nor are the details of the measures that need to be adopted, the measures that are necessary to take. It is therefore important to read Article 4 in the context of other provisions of the Convention, the purpose and objective of the Convention, as well as additional understandings and agreements that have been adopted by states parties during review conferences, and that have provided useful interpretation, definition, or elaboration on the meaning or scope of the Convention's provisions, as well as guidelines, recommendations on how provisions could or should be implemented. And states' practice, as is reflected, for example, in the BWC National Implementation Database, is also helpful. So Article 4 refers to any necessary measures. As some have highlighted, necessary measures 50 years ago were not the same as necessary measures today. So it is important to continuously review what is necessary to give effect to the Convention in light of its object and purpose. Article 4 refers to measures to prohibit and prevent biological and toxin weapons. So the prohibition of activities with biological weapons in criminal legislation is necessary, but not only. The adoption of measures in other areas of law, especially to prevent activities, is relevant. Article 4 and its national implementation requirements must also be read in light in Article 1, as understood today, and including the reaffirmation by states parties that the use of biological weapons is covered by Article 1, and that it applies to all scientific and technological developments in the life science and in other fields of science relevant to the Convention. In addition, the adoption of national implementation measures facilitates compliance and is necessary for the effectiveness of other articles of the Convention. So the review conferences of the Convention have, in that sense, noted the value of national implementation measures as appropriate in accordance with the constitutional process of each state party to prevent anyone from developing, producing, stockpiling, or otherwise acquiring or retaining, but also transporting or transferring and using under any circumstances biological agents and toxins, equipments, or their means of delivery for non-peaceful purposes. So this wording reflects the prohibition of the use of biological weapons, but also it reflects the wording of Article 4, but also the understanding that the use of weapons is prohibited, and it also reflects the wording of Article 3 to prohibit the transfer of biological weapons. In that sense, it is important to adopt prohibitions, but also measures to control the export of biological materials and toxins in a manner consistent with Article 10 to facilitate the exchange of materials, equipment, and information for the use of biological and toxins for peaceful purposes. Now, with those clarifications and explanations on the meaning and scope of national implementation, I wanted to provide a brief, though non-exhaustive summary of the types of national implementation measures that have been adopted by states parties as reflected in the BWC National Implementation Database, and also highlight some of the challenges that we have observed while working on the database. So to pick up on Jamie's numbers, we have collected a number of resources for all the profiles that have been completed. And those measures include legal measures, primary and secondary legislation, laws, regulations, decrees, etc., but also administrative measures, as well as codes of conduct, guidance. And this shows that states parties' national implementing measures reflect unique national and sometimes regional circumstances and experience. So there are various approaches to implement the BWC through all of those measures, and it really depends on each country, and there's no unique approach. In terms of substance, a number of states parties have adopted prohibition relevant to the BWC in their criminal legislation, in their anti-terrorism legislation. So we have collected those measures. But a detailed analysis, however, highlights some of the challenges in adopting legislation that adequately reflect the scope and the requirements of the convention. So, for example, some BWC-specific implementing laws do not include an explicit prohibition of the use of biological weapons, which is not explicitly included in the convention, but is effectively prohibited under the convention. Other criminal laws only prohibit activities with biological weapons in the context of terrorism, but not in all circumstances. So those are some of the challenges and the limitations that we have observed in some measures. We have also observed that states parties have adopted related criminal procedure provisions to enable investigation and prosecutions of offenses with biological weapons. Some of those measures are common to all types of crimes, but some really include specific elements related to biological weapons and related materials. For example, specific measures to secure, transport, and dispose of biological and toxins that have been seized in the context of criminal investigations. Another area that the BWC National Implementation Database looks at is measures for exports, imports, and other transfer controls. So those are covered to varying extent through, again, different types of laws. Those can be dual-use trade laws, or they can be included in BWC-specific laws that include elements on export control. Or sometimes they are also covered in laws covering plant health, animal health, human health. In the latter case, however, those measures are sometimes missing a specific non-proliferation purpose, or they're missing an element that really reflects the requirements of the Biological Weapons Convention. The BWC National Implementation Measures Database also includes measures for the safety and security of biological agents and toxins in laboratories, facilities, and during transportation. So we look at those measures, whether we can find them. So this is reflected in the database. And with regards to biosafety and biosecurity, relevant measures can similarly be included in BWC-specific laws and/or regulations, or laws covering human pathogens, plant health, human health, genetically modified organisms, but again, not always with a specific biosecurity focus, and not always covering all biological agents and toxins falling within the scope of the BWC. So this may create gaps in securing peaceful activities with high-risk biological agents and toxins. New scientific and technological developments are also to some extent included in states parties' national implementation measures, including, for example, specific policies, guidelines, or codes of conduct to regulate dual-use research, as well as sometimes specific measures related to cyber biosecurity. With regards to the institutional framework, the database also looks at measures to identify a national contact point or a national authority for the BWC, and a number of states have designated the national contact point, but a number of other institutions are also involved in BWC-related matters, as is reflected on the database. Other information is provided in the database, such as whether states have submitted confidence-building measures, working papers, and reports to the 1540 committee, and a number of states parties have done so, as is reflected on the database. On the basis of this brief overview, I just wanted to provide a few suggestions to consider during discussions on strengthening national implementation. So I'll try to be brief. So the first suggestion is to really reaffirm the importance and the benefits of national implementation through the adoption of legal, administrative, regulatory, and other measures to prohibit and prevent biological weapons, but also the benefits of such measures to secure the peaceful uses and transfers of biological agents and toxins. The second suggestion is to share accurate and up-to-date information on national implementation. So research and analysis by academics and institutes should be promoted and facilitated, as well as the development of tools such as the database. And as James was saying in his introductory remark, those tools, for example, the BWC National Implementation Database, are being used. We see that we have a number of users, regular users from different institutions, from different countries, and this is really it shows the value of those tools that can also be used to inform assistance activity, for example, and activities to strengthen national implementation. So the country profiles that we develop on the BWC National Implementation Database can be helpful to inform detailed legal review and the drafting of additional national implementation measures. As James was saying, we also encourage BWC states parties to collaborate with us on the development of the BWC National Implementation Database to ensure the accuracy and the relevance of the data that we publish. So we really encourage states parties to liaise with us when we develop the country profiles. Now, research analysis and data sharing, as I was saying, can also support practical knowledge sharing activities on national implementation in the context of national and regional workshops and exercises, or on the margin of working group sessions, for example, through interactive activities conducive to the identification of lessons learned and recommendation. And such activities should emphasize the meaning, scope, importance, and benefits of national implementation and facilitate, again, the sharing of best practices and experiences which can help further implementation. Finally, tailored and coordinated international cooperation in assistance is key to strengthen national implementation. This includes direct tailored support, and I believe we'll hear from ongoing initiatives in a few minutes. And there are also a number of tools, again, that can be used to support this assistance and this support. So with that, I conclude my remarks, and I look forward to hearing the views of my co-panelists and the audience. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sonia, for providing us with this really excellent overview of BWC national implementation. I was particularly interested in the points you brought on the need for dynamic interpretation of Article 4, now 50 years after the adoption of the Convention, and also the links with the various other articles, and what are some of the measures and the challenges that states parties face, and how our tools could provide some support, hopefully. So this sets the ground perfectly for our next panelist. So I'll give the floor to Ms. Dilok Watana to share BWC states parties' perspectives on national implementation measures. So I think it's based on her insights from her work as friend of the chair on these issues. So Ms. Dilok Watana, you have.
Yes, thank you so much, Lucine, Jamie, and also the UNIDIR team for organizing this very important event and opportunity to speak. And good morning and good afternoon, everyone. So first, I actually will set the scene by providing the information on the discussion on the national implementation measure in the working group that we have since 2023. And second, I will follow by outlining the role of the national authorities in this purpose. Those insights that I'm going to share with you are gained from my work as one of the friends of the chair on this topic. And together with Australia, Michelle is sitting with us today, and Indonesia, Panama, Uganda, we engage pretty much with all stakeholders and state party in order just to find the way forward on this issue. So let me brief you a little bit about what the working group discussed on this issue. So the working group has discussed this topic. We have 2 days of the discussion in 2023, another 2 days that we will have on 2025, and 1 day in 2026. It is very important for the friend of the chair and for the chair as well, of course, to keep the discussion ongoing in several occasions. So I'm very thankful that this event would be one of that. And since July 2023, the Friend of the Chair have conducted a number of informal consultations, both with regional groups and bilaterally with states. In particular, those that have previously submitted proposals on the topic online, and it was done online and in person in Geneva. So, and this year, the Friend of the Chair, we also sent food for thought paper as a possible ground to develop our discussion with the state bodies and with the facilitation of the UNIDIR. The national implementation measure was one of the BWC series of webinar held by the UNIDIR. From I can see like a lot of you that were participating in our engagement, and we're looking forward for your engagement in the future. So from the engagement with the states, we established that there's a broad agreement among delegations that full and effective national implementation is critical to the success of the BWC. And as mentioned by Sonia, Article 4 of the Convention obliges state parties to both prohibit and prevent the development, production, stockpiling, acquisition, or retention of biological weapons. In that, some states said that while prohibiting may be relatively straightforward, the prevention aspect is perhaps more complex and demanding more comprehensive measure. Many delegations also highlighted that the national implementation requires a holistic, multi-sectoral approach at national level. However, having national implementing legislation and other measures in place and a national coordinating authority is important part, but it is the only one aspect of national implementation. Many delegations also spoke that there's a need for regular review of national implementation measures, and of these being a continuous process of improvement. State party also shared a view on the strong link between the national implementation and other provisions under the treaty, including the ICA, the SNT, CBM, as well as the link between the national implementation and the work of other frameworks, including the WHO, UNSC, 1540 resolution. State also laid a number of concrete measures adopted by them in order to strengthen national implementation of BWC. It range allow administrative, legislative, and the policy. So this kind of consultation and engagement that we have, it's led to the concrete proposal, and what we try to do is we try to pose some guiding question that we hopefully that could review the categories or threshold on the national implementation measure that could ensure full and effective implementation of the convention. So while we posting this kind of question, a lot of states also enhance on the role of national authorities in this process, especially in administering and enforcing BWC implementation. So I think Sonia already touched upon the role of the national authority. So as an example, I will post Thailand, like from my country, and this information that is quite elaborative and comprehensive that you also could find in the database provided by the UNIDIR. So if you go to the database, that would say like there's there would be several agencies that in charge of the implementation of the BWC. Is range from the Ministry of Public Health, Ministry of Transport, Agriculture and Cooperative, Ministry of Commerce. It could be Ministry of Defense as well, Office of Council of the State, Loyal Thai Police, Office of Judiciary, and Office of Attorney General. So it could be, I would say, various of them, and it's in because BWC is touched upon the life size. So to coordinate the national implementation, in 2004, the Cabinet of Thailand appointed the biotech as a BWC national contract point. And at the same time, the technical arm for those implementing agency. It means that by enhancing the effective development, we are pretty much in agreement that the national contract point should be there and should establish in terms of to implement and to coordinate and to link a lot of initiative together. So in closing, I think I would like as well just to point out that the role of the national implementation that intersect with several provisions that we already apply, and also some of the initiative that we push upon in several forums. And as a friend of the chair, we would also like to continue this discussion. And as we're approaching to the end of this year, and we think that we might have some consultation in order just to provide a recommendation to the next MSP. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing BWC States Party's perspective on national implementation. It's always fascinating to hear those very first accounts of both what's happening in Geneva, but also in states parties themselves. So thanks for sharing Thailand's experience. And to continue on that path, I will now give the floor to Mr. Faniel, who will provide an overview of the BWC Implementation Support Unit activities to strengthen national implementation in African countries. So Sylvain, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Louison, and good afternoon, everyone. Let me first thank UNIDIR for organizing this important event. It's always a pleasure to be here and share what we are observing in state parties when they are implementing the BWC. So this presentation will focus briefly on what we are doing in Africa, but also I will end by providing a few observations on good practices and maybe also challenges faced on the African continent. So our project is basically open to all states of Africa. So we are almost working with all African states right now. And our activities are supported via voluntary contributions in the context of the Global Partnership Against the Spread of Weapons and Materials of Mass Destruction, the European Union, and France. And as you can see on this map, there is still a bit of challenge related to the universalization of the convention in Africa. We still have 6 states that are not party to the BWC being in Africa. So how are we helping states when it comes to national implementation of the BWC? First, and I already touched upon it, we are promoting the universalization of the convention. So we hope to raise awareness of the BWC in non-state parties so they could soon join the convention. Second element is to provide legislative assistance, and this is the first time the UN Office for Disarmament Affairs has an internal capacity to provide legal assistance. So we are now in a position to provide a comprehensive assistance when it comes to BWC implementation. The third pillar, it's about capacity building, mainly when it comes to the preparation and submission of confidence building measures, but also related to the training for NCPs, for example, how to identify various stakeholders, how to build structures at a domestic level to enable a comprehensive and efficient implementation of the convention. This is also related to the fourth pillar, where we support the designation of NCP, and there are still very few states in Africa that have not yet designated NCP. And we know all here the importance of NCPs when it comes to BWC implementation. And the last point is strengthening coordination. Coordination at the domestic level between national stakeholders, but also coordination when it comes to third-party assistance, and that's basically in the context of Article 10 database. We do not ourselves provide technical assistance, but we facilitate matchmaking between countries requesting technical assistance with countries that are in a position to offer specific technical assistance. So this slide is to give you an overview of the type of events we are organizing depending of the category of assistance. I won't elaborate too much on this slide, just to say, and it was already mentioned by the previous panelist, the importance of having tailor-made assistance. Every single country has different practices, challenges when it comes to BWC implementation. Therefore, we discuss beforehand with the state, before conducting capacity building activities or awareness raising activities, to be able to really address precisely the needs of each state we are working with. This is an overview of the type of activities we have conducted in 2024. So you see on the left-hand side of the slide, the one that we have already conducted this year. Upcoming activities are on the top. I would like to bring your attention to the fact that we also conduct sub-regional events, and we have conducted the sub-regional event for the Southern African region in Botswana in March, and that's enabling us to have a clear overview of potential challenges that are specific to sub-regions of the continent. For the last almost 2 years, we have trained around 850 individuals, conducted 5 sub-regional events and 21 national activities in Africa. I'll now move to a few observations when it comes to national implementation. Those observations are based on our experience in implementing the projects in Africa, but of course some of these observations may be also applicable to other regions. The first one is the rapid progress at the national level after the conduct of national activities. So given the multi-sectoral nature of the BWC, the first important step is usually to have everyone in the same room at the same time to discuss the BWC. A few ministries alone will not be sufficient to comprehensively implement the BWC. That really requires a multi-sectoral approach, not only between governmental authorities, but also with the private sector, academia, etc. And I will say a few words on that in a few minutes. So what we see is that when we bring people around the table, they all contribute with their own expertise, their own vision about the BWC, and overall this contributes to a comprehensive implementation of the BWC at a national level. What we also observe is that there is a tremendous amount of expertise at the domestic level, whether being in the field of biosafety, biosecurity, disease prevention, etc. So it is important for this community to raise awareness of the BWC and to link their job, their operational job, with the role of the BWC at the domestic level, but also at the global level. And this is related to the third point, that very often we see that the health people and the security people do not always talk to each other. That's a challenge that is not specifically related to the BWC, but can be observed also in the implementation of other international conventions and treaties. So I think it's also our role when we conduct activities to bring people together and to explain why the mandate of the health people and the security people together contribute to reinforcing the implementation of the convention. It was already mentioned previously, the importance of coordination, and it's always challenging, and we see that quite often, to have coordination mechanism established at a domestic level. This convention requires the involvement of a lot of actors, so it's important for state to establish structure, whether they are formal or informal, to ensure that the dialogue at a domestic level is continuous when it comes to BWC implementation. Some states establish committees, national committees, others establish more formal institutions to ensure that the dialogue is ongoing. Limited financial and human resources, that's probably not a surprise to you, but this is something we are indeed observing in a lot of states. And especially staff turnover. What I mean by that, if we have an NCP that is located at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, for example, we know that the nature of diplomats is to move around, so that NCP will very likely be posted elsewhere. So it's very important in this regard to ensure that there is institutional knowledge that is maintained. An approach taken by some states is to designate maybe 2 NCPs, so that to ensure that if one is rotating, the other one will take over before designating another NCP. Those are ways to mitigate the risk of losing this institutional knowledge. Challenges of controlling import and export of sensitive items. This was mentioned already by Sonia. We live in a society where there are more and more exchanges of technologies, of equipment, whether being for research purposes or for the production of vaccines. And what we observe in states is that it's often very difficult for national authorities to control what is coming in and what is coming out of the country. Also because this requires, and this enables me to link that point to previous points, it requires very good coordination, usually between customs or the Ministry of Commerce and other entities in the state. But this also requires training for people that are at customs. They need to know when they see a specific equipment that this equipment might be sensitive, therefore might require further control. So we do see quite a lot of challenges in Africa when it comes to controlling import and export of sensitive items. And finally, it's the multiplication of obligation and reporting between various disarmament and non-proliferation regime. Of course, the nature of reporting we have in the context of the BWC is very different in comparison, for example, to the CWC or to nuclear safeguards agreement, but there's still work to do. And very often in states, we have 1 or 2 persons doing everything. So there is a bit of a multiplication of tasks. That's something that is also challenging for quite a lot of states. Very brief observation on the legislative aspect. In Africa, we have very few states at the moment that have comprehensive legislation to implement the BWC, and we are now working with a bit more than 10 states in either drafting the BWC implementing legislation or amending existing legislation. But this remains challenging for a few reasons. First, we have a few states where the laws have been developed, but they are pending government approval. So this explains why it's important also to sensitize senior decision makers, policy makers, of the importance of such type of piece of legislation. There are also competing government priorities that may delay the adoption of BWC implementing legislation. Again, the importance of sensitization. But what we have observed is that every single country we have worked with has already some piece of legislation related to biosafety and biosecurity, which basically means that no state we are working with has to start from scratch when it comes to developing BWC implementing legislation. There is already something in the state. And finally, the importance of legal database, including the VERTIC UNIDIR database. This offers an ideal tool for states to compare what other states are doing and how other states are facing challenges related to the development of BWC implementing legislation. On the website, they can very easily see what has been done elsewhere, find maybe some inspiration on what to do in their own domestic system. So for those of you from states that are developing such legislation, I would recommend you to look at the website and see how this can also benefit the process you are having at a domestic level. And finally, I will end with a few good practices. First is South-South collaboration. We are seeing more and more discussions on BWC implementation among regional actors. This is experience sharing, challenges sharing. Also, working groups that we are attending this week enables NCP to build relationship with other NCP, therefore, I would say joining forces on finding solution related to national implementation challenges. We also try in our activities to always facilitate the exchange between regional actors. So we always invite in our activities other experts from other countries in Africa to share their experience. Coordination, I mentioned already the challenges related to coordination. I just want to highlight a few good practices. It's, for example, the establishment of a committee that will meet once or twice per year to reassess the status of the BWC implementation in the state. That meeting usually gathers all key line ministries, but also the industry, professional associations such as Biosafety or Biosecurity Association, but also the private sector and research institutions that are actually using pathogens, toxins, but also the related equipment. Stakeholder outreach, it's related to the point I just mentioned. It's important not only to focus on governmental entities. We have seen very good practices, for example, on having public information campaign developed in some states in Africa, where they reach out to the population and explain the importance of the BWC, but also, generally speaking, of biosafety and biosecurity. We have also seen campaign not only limited to capital cities, but going elsewhere in the countryside, in laboratories located very far from capital that are actually working with animals, for example. This is also important to raise awareness in this field. And I've said it many times, the involvement of the private and academic sector. Those are the ones using biological agents and toxins and the related equipment and technology. Those are ultimately the ones that will be controlled by national authorities, so they will be receiving authorization, so they need to be very much aware of what is expected from them at a domestic level, and therefore also being aware where this control is coming from. It's actually to implement the biological weapons convention. So I think with that, I will end my presentation, and I'm happy to take any question in the next few minutes. Thank you.
Merci, many thanks, Sylvain, for your presentation and for sharing more information on the BWC ISU activities with African countries. I thought your point on South-South cooperation was particularly interesting, and I hope we will hear more about it during the Q&A. And I have to say that we are also grateful for our cooperation with your team this year to reflect as accurately as possible measures that were implemented by African countries. So thanks also for this. So now we would like to move to a discussion session where we are keen on getting your views and answering any questions from participants, both in the room and online. So for those that are in the room, please state your name and affiliation before asking a question. And I noticed we have some questions already online, but you can submit more using the Q&A function. So do we have any question in the room? Yes, I see the distinguished representative of Uganda. Please.
Yeah, thank you so much. Joseph Kodio from Uganda. I am the National Coordinator Biosafety Biosecurity Program in the country. I want to thank the previous speaker for clearly being very elaborate in regards to what you've done in Africa. And I do appreciate the effort that is being put in. My questions. One, yes, you've done a lot of work in Africa, and from your presentation, I think we have no doubt. I would be expecting here more of the African countries attesting to your report or your submission to this side event, so that I can see people trying to acknowledge the input. Two, I think we need to see this more in our continent. So I would expect that we have more meetings so that we can share ideas. You mentioned here that people share, there's experience sharing, joint force, and finding solutions. Those are all very good approaches to making sure governments are implementing. But I think an addition we would have is to see the countries that are implementing, presenting to these forums, so that they can be able to tell us under what legal framework they're trying to implement the BWC, who are the stakeholders they're dealing with in this implementation, what benefits have they achieved? Yes, much as you have the benefits, there must be challenges. What challenges? If somebody has a legal entity, is he having issues of resources, logistics? Because since you mentioned that we have issues of logistics, and then what recommendations do they give? Because we need domestic recommendations to own up the implementation. As I conclude my submission, I want to say that I think we need to now meet the institutions, not individuals. In some of the countries, the implementation is on an individual. Uganda, we have an institution or institutions. Is it the same case in other countries, or you're interacting with individuals who are not remitting back on the grassroots? Thank you.
Many thanks for your question. That was really interesting. Do you want to take a couple more? Or do you prefer to directly answer this one? Yes. So you want to start? Okay. Then perhaps Sylvain, you can start.
Thank you very much. And there were a lot of interesting points raised. So apologize in advance if I'm missing one or two. Yes. So there are indeed states in the room that have benefited from assistance. And as you have heard the last 4 days, many African states in their national statement also acknowledged the assistance provided in the context of BWC implementation, which basically means that the profile of the BWC is raising in Africa. In December last year for the MSP, we never had such a high number of African states taking the floor to substantively contribute to the discussion of state parties. That's a positive trend that we are also seeing this week, and we are expecting this dynamic to continue in the future. As I mentioned, there's a tremendous experience in Africa that is now being more and more shared in these types of international fora. So that's really something positive. On hearing experience from African states, we had a side event in December. Maybe you were not there, but we are planning to have other side events in the future to also enable to give our partners a platform to share how they benefited, but also how also we could improve when delivering the assistance when it comes to BWC implementation. Challenges on legal implementation, I guess my colleague will have other points, so I'll just mention one, and it's related also to the institution that you have mentioned. Whether you need one or more institution, that's a sovereign decision of the state that has to be adapted to the characteristics of the state, also the interministerial picture of the state. Sometimes there is one or more institution. What I want to say here is that we advise state that it's not always, especially when it comes to limited resources, it's not always needed to create something new. Very often states already have some entities working in the field of biosafety, biosecurity, and maybe these entities, for example, are already conducting inspections and delivering licenses to use specific technologies. So it's not always needed to create something new, because creating something new requires more resources, and we know they are limited everywhere. So this is why we always advise states to see whether some modification could be brought to existing institutions that may pick up some, I would say, task related to a BWC implementation. So that's very briefly a few points I wanted to make, but I'm sure my colleagues will have other points to add. Thank you.
Thanks, Sylvain. Any of you two would like to take the floor for this? Yeah, okay, please, Ms. Dillop.
For the question, actually, first of all, I wish to join Sylvain as well in commending the increased interest of Africa in BWC is tremendous. And actually, if you could notice, Uganda takes a very, very leading role, because Uganda, now you are friend of the chair of the two, and very, I would say, important for the BWC working group. And we look forward to I would say, to your very interesting input and then the perspective of African. So I actually agree with Sylvain on the challenges that he just mentioned, and also what he just mentioned during his presentation. I think, and that is the coordination between the line agencies and also the coordination among the actors, whether it's private partners, facilities, national authorities. I think it's very important for the state to make sure that that channel is run very well. And it's very interesting to know that we can have more than just one national contact point. Yeah, and I think it's a plus as well, that is a prerogative of the state just to establish that. And even you asked about the challenge on national implementation, but from my personal perspective, I always say the reinforcing effect among national, regional, and also international implementation. It means that some of the states, they might seek some help and assistance from elsewhere, just try to make sure that the capacity is enhanced in order to fulfill the obligation under the treaty. But some of the time, it's such a mismatch among requesting and the supply of the assistance in need. So that's why we're very supportive of this database that done by the ISU so far. And also, I think it's quite essential as well if all the countries would be interested in providing comprehensive information, or whether there's any challenges, or is there any legal background or any information about their legislation. It means that by learning from other profile, they could also make their own success in adapting the information and the practice of other states into their own context. Yeah, thank you.
Many thanks for this detailed answer. I think, Sonia, you wish to have a few comments as well.
Very much for your very interesting comments and insight. I think just to briefly pick up on the point about countries sharing their experience. I think that's also one of the purpose of the database, not necessarily to share the practical experience of strengthening national implementation and adopting measures, but be able to see what other countries have done, look at different approaches. So this is really one of the objectives of this tool, is for every country to be able to see what others have done. compare different approaches and see what maybe can be an inspiration, something that would be feasible in their own countries. In terms of the legal challenge related to implementation, I think, as Sylvain was saying, it's very important to note that there is, again, there are different approaches to implement the convention, as, again, the findings of the BWC National Implementation Database show. And I would very much agree with the fact that it is possible to take small steps, and I think showing the different types of laws and the variety of measures that have been adopted, it is possible to start from something that already exists and amend the legislation, or a country can decide to have a comprehensive, completely new BWC-specific implementing law, for example. So again, something that the database has shown and can give examples and inspiration.
Thanks, Sonia. So hopefully this answers your question. I see other questions in the room. So we have the representative of Australia, please.
Thank you very much for convening this event, and all to the panelists for your presentations. I think one point made by one or more panelists was about the need for health and security areas within national systems to be coordinating with each other. That really resonated. I think that's something that we're still trying to improve within our own system. I also wanted to commend UNIDIR on the National Implementation Database. Australia was very pleased to collaborate with you on the development of our profile in the database, and we think it's an incredibly impressive resource, so thank you. National implementation is, of course, one of the topics being considered by the working group, and it's been tasked to devise recommendations on that, along with the other topics. And as I'm one of the friends of the chair for that topic, alongside Atakan, I have a question about where the working group can best focus its efforts. So while there's no one-size-fits-all approach to national implementation, we know that previous review conferences have reached common understandings of the type and range of measures that could be helpful and necessary for national implementation. And my question for all the panelists is, how do you think the working group can build on these previous understandings? And what sort of specific and effective measures do you think the working group could recommend to states parties for consideration? Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks also for the kind words on the database. Perhaps, I don't know, Sonia or Sylvain, if you want to start with perhaps even the second questions on the working group. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. Yeah, I think as I was saying in my remarks, it's very useful to start with the additional understandings and agreements that have been adopted by states parties during successive review conferences and compile them and see how this can create a framework for what is meant and what can be covered by national implementation, but also looking at the different categories, for example, of the BWC National Implementation Database gives a good indication of the types of measures that constitute a national implementation framework. And this resonates also with what Atakan was saying about some states saying that, for example, the prohibition requirement is quite clear, but not so much the prevention aspect. And then tools such as the database can provide useful guidance as to what constitute prevention measures. So we have categories including licensing or other control requirements, physical protection measures, end user certificated, so on, that are measures that help prevent unauthorized access to biological agents and toxins. So I think this can really be something that states can look at and consider in the context of the working group.
Sylvain or Atakan? Yes.
Thank you very much for this question. Of course, I can't prejudge how the working group will decide about national implementation, but I think that a first good element is really what's actually the title of this event: taking stock of what's happening. Every single state has a different practice. We are seeing good things. We are seeing things that constitute more challenges when it comes to BWC implementation. But I strongly believe that if there is a detailed overview of good practices, and some are specific to some continent as well, and we have to take that into account, it would, I think, enable you to propose concrete recommendations on the way ahead. And you would directly see common practices that are working. And those are the ones that should be defended in the course of your upcoming meetings. Also, and I mentioned it already, the importance of experience sharing, especially at a regional level. I'm always saying that there are no better experts when it comes to challenges in Africa than experts from Africa. Of course, we are in a position to initiate, I would say, assistance, but at the end, it's the state themselves that are able together to address challenges. So, and to change this in a recommendation would be really to prioritize these regional approaches, not only in terms of common practices, but also common threats. When we look at Africa, for example, many countries are facing similar epidemics, dangerous pathogens, etc., and they have built already together at a sub-regional and regional level some ways to respond to these threats. So that would be my very limited take on the way ahead. Thank you.
Please, I think.
Thank you, Michelle, for the question. I found it's very tricky because we both try to find that answer. But okay, well, first, I think I agree with Sonia, because when we talk about the implementation of BWC, what we should take into account is, of course, first is provision of the treaty, and another thing is the state practices. So when you talk about the state practice, it's evolved by time, and it's also evolved and be influenced by the advance of new technology and other factors, and especially as we all experience as this COVID-19 that reminded us that we have to redouble our effort in addressing it. And on the other thing, I also agree with Sylvain that there's no one size fits all, and this means that we have to taking into account the practices at the national and regional level. And some of the time, I think, especially when it's come to the prevention and prohibition, we also have to take in consideration that who is our counterpart in terms of peaceful use. For example, because I have the Russian delegation in front of me, I still remember that we have a lot of trade relation, and every time that we try to export our agriculture product, we always have to comply with a very comprehensive, I'm not complaining, but by complying with more comprehensive biosafety and biosecurity requirements, this means that my country also learned a lot from that. And so what we took away from that is mean that we go back to our line agency, and maybe we talk to the facility as well. So that's we learn how to improve our requirement. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. So I see we have other questions in the room. So perhaps the representative of the United States, please.
Thank you so much for taking the question. I wanted to start off by saying I was here last year and got to see the presentation, and I've been really excited to see how the database has grown over the last year. And, you know, I appreciate all the work that's happening in this space. But one of the questions that I had was, like, I know funding is an issue, is always an issue. And, you know, has there been a problem where you've had to turn down countries that have requested help, or is there some prioritization that you're doing?
Thank you for your question. Perhaps this is a question also to the ISU activities and UNIDIR's activities later for Sonia, maybe. So Sylvain, yes.
Thank you for this question. I'm speaking only for Africa. We never had to turn down a country. We have been very fortunate to have sufficient voluntary contribution to enable us so far to help all African countries. The challenges we have is of a programmatic nature. It means there's a lot of needs and we have limited staff. So we are not in a position to respond to all requests in a very short period of time. But we are doing our best to address within a few months all requests. And you can imagine that when we go in states, there is also a lot of logistics involved that requires time. So yeah, we are quite busy, but fortunately from a budget perspective, we never had so far a problem. What I would like to end with is the sustainability of assistance. And we have now a voluntary contribution that of course will end at one point. But for many countries, it's important to provide sustainable assistance, particularly in the legal area, where I've never seen personally a state adopting a law within 3-4 months. And I hear Sonia laughing because she knows that for some states it took up to 10 years, even more. And in this context, it's important for us to accompany the state throughout the process, not only helping them to assess their legal framework or helping them to draft PwC legislation, but also to sensitize parliamentarians and decision makers in the role they play, of course, in adopting ultimately the legislation. So that requires a lot of time. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Sylvain, for the answer. So I see we have another question in the room. So from the representative of the Russian Federation, please.
I would like to thank all the distinguished panelists for the insightful presentation and comments. Definitely it took a great effort to form the database. So it would be interesting to know the volume of the current version, how many entries or documents it contains up to the moment. And the second part of my question about further development of the database, what your plan about the issue, maybe from the point of view to put in practice some modern elements like machine learning, like artificial intelligence, maybe in order to make not only reference instrument, but a kind of decision-making solution for example, searching of common weak points in legislation, for decision-making, and so on. Thank you.
Thank you for this question. Perhaps I can let Sonia and then also Jamie give a bit more details on the project, but yes, Sonia.
Yes, thank you very much for your question. So in terms of the numbers, so we have completed to date, the latest I know, 125 states party country profile, and we have collected about 2,250 resources. By resource, as I said earlier, I mean laws, but also regulations, codes of conduct, guidance, guidelines, etc. So a significant amount of country profiles have been completed and a significant amount of resources. In terms of the further development of the database, we are very much, first of all, seeking feedback, as we say, from the countries, not only on the information that concerns them, but also on how we could improve the database. So I take note of your suggestion for example, new categories, and this is something that we are currently discussing, perhaps in the coming month, to do a review of the categories that we have in the database and whether it would make sense to include things such as artificial intelligence, which is something that we already started discussing. Perhaps have some specific measures as well related to disease prevention, because at the moment we don't have something specific about this. So really make sure that it stays relevant and includes developments in the science and technology field, for example. So yeah, including new categories is one of this aspect. I'm not sure if Jamie wanted to add anything.
Thanks. Thanks for the question. I think, Sonia, you covered a number of points I was going to raise. I think we're currently concentrated on getting through the next 60 or so states so we can have the full database completed, and then moving on to actually go through an update as well, because we do want to keep it as a living database and continue to draw in those updates. But I really would echo what Sonia just said. I think there could be real interest in looking at AI bio policies and then the policies for assistance. But before we get too carried away, I think it's important that we continue to sort of look around at what is going on, what are the mechanisms and databases that are in place, including things that our colleagues in the ISU may be developing in time or in due course to make sure that we're not duplicating or getting in each other's way. So I think that's something we need to reflect on when we get to the end. But I really appreciate the input. And if other people have ideas as well, be keen to get other thoughts as to where we can take this and what we can do with it. So thank you.
Thanks. So I do not see any other question in the room, but perhaps Maria, because I haven't checked, we have some questions online or not?
There is one question online that is focused, it's a little bit more broad focused, I think. It's as the PwC approaches universalization with two recent additions to the list of states parties, how could we collectively further strengthen this regime in the coming years?
Okay, thank you. Who wishes to start with this question?
It's a very broad one.
Perhaps, Sonia, you're brave.
If I'm brave. Yeah, well, I think very briefly, it's very important, of course, to mention universalization and welcome new states parties to the convention, but really emphasize the importance that once you're a state party, it is important to implement the convention at the national level. So strengthening the regime goes by adopting measures to give effect to the convention. So national implementation and strengthening national implementation is a way to strengthen the regime. That's a brief and simple response, but yeah, perhaps my co-panelists have suggestions too.
Sylvain, yes.
Thank you for the question. It's indeed a very open question that could keep us here until probably tomorrow. I just want to raise 2 points. First, from an assistance perspective, of course, we try to have states joining the BWC, but then our message needs to be then the work really starts when it comes to strengthening the national implementation. And there we need to accompany states. It's a long process, but when a newly state party join the BWC, they have to know that assistance is available, not only from international organizations, but also from state parties themselves at a bilateral level. They need to feel supported in this process because very often it's something new. And the other element I would like to say is that from what we see in Africa, we expect the needs to be a lot on the legal dimension in the future, but the needs might evolve rapidly. And this is going back to what Sonia mentioned on the fact that the convention is nearly 50 years old and national implementation is very different now from what it was before. It means the assistance we are providing needs to be fit to the evolutions we are facing in our societies. There are a lot of evolution in biotechnologies. How, as international organizations, as states parties, are we addressing these challenges? Because if there are such challenges, we need to be also able to help states facing challenges when it comes to national implementation with regards to these evolution. So it's really, I would say, an ongoing process, and it's important to always reassess what we are doing, what's going well, what's maybe not going so well, and how we can improve our assistance to states.
Very hard to be the last one to answer after these two eminent speakers. So I quite agree with you all, and I think to put it in a very concrete way, it's like you just treat the implementation and how well your fulfillment, your obligation, like a health check. So it means if you annually go to the hospital, checking what you are doing so far, you do the same with how you implement it, because you cannot believe the evolution of the science and technology is very fast. And also, the benefit of reviewing is mean that sometimes you might learn as well that in some circumstance in 50 years ago, that kind of provision might work, but now it's not anymore. So there's a chance as well that you would like to review it, and also taking in consideration with so many factors, including emerging technology like AI that you just mentioned. And also, some of the time, I wish that we should be more encouraging for the South-South cooperation, because the level of development is close to each other, and it's pretty much easier to apply to the similar context. And I think that it's going to be